Hello and welcome to Bleeding Tree Gaming. My name's Amy aka Warpfiend, and in this video I'm going furry with the wolf boys of the 41st millennium. I first got into 40k when a high school friend bought the Space Wolves Codex in one day and I was immediately hooked. I used to have a fair few Space Wolf models and some of my favourites were the Wolf Guard Terminators. So when I recently got a chance to pick up one of those models again, I jumped at the opportunity to do a retro style paint job on it. Let's start with the blue armour. I know a lot of people prefer the wolves to be a bit less blue and a bit more grey, and the older models were actually less saturated than I'm going to be painting, but memory is a tricky thing and a nice saturated icy blue like the wilds of Fenris feels a bit more retro than the actual grey blue that they used. I started from a white base coat to get the most vibe, and I'm going to cover the whole thing in bright sapphire. I'll be using a bunch of off-white colours in this, and it's very important with these paints to get them flowing properly with plenty of water or medium, or the larger pigments of these near whites will give some unwanted texture to the piece. It's also important to let these paints dry fully before working over them. My usual techniques of wet on wet painting will just result in that pigment pulling off the surfaces here. After that's done, I start shading down with some crystal blue. I'm going to glaze this onto the shadows to create some gradients on the armour panels. I'll also be running it into the recesses. Next I take some Payne's Grey, and this is just going to be painted very finely into the recesses. This should really help to separate all those panels. Finally, I take some white blue and edge highlight all of those armour panels. With the biggest part done, let's base some of the other sections to get an idea what I'm dealing with, and then I can come in and detail them one by one. The wolf pelt on his back is getting a coat of Mournfang brown, as are all the wolf tail totems. The right pauldron, the knee pad and the gun casing are all going to be yellow. For the knee pad and gun I use Iandin yellow, as it's easy to get a simple gradient on these smaller sections that looks acceptable. For the pauldron, however, I'm going to use Imperial Fist and then add that gradient in later on. I just find it a bit difficult to control the way that the Iandin yellow will deposit the darker sections on large curved surfaces like this, and Imperial Fist gives a fairly smooth, even coat. I paint bone colours a lot in videos, so I'm going to skip over how I paint that, but the paints used are on screen now if you're interested. I don't have any Agrax Earthshade to hand, so I'm going to dilute some Wildwood contrast paint with some Lamia medium to shade the wolf pelt as well as those bone parts. Okay, with those sections sketched in, let's get to detailing. The yellow shoulder pad gets some glazes with Jacaro orange, trying to get an even gradient. When I need to tidy it up, I jump to some Flash Gits yellow. This matches really well with that Imperial Fist contrast paint. To edge highlight all the yellow, I take some ice yellow and just add a little titanium white just to give it a little extra boost. To finish up that yellow, I freehand some jagged triangles onto the knee pad and gun in black paint. I use plenty of medium to keep the black paint flowing nicely and start small. It's easy to make the black triangles wider than it is to repaint that yellow over black. I use a little grey to highlight the freehand. Next, the wolf pelt. I'm going to do this in a few stages. First I apply something like a selective layer highlight with some Deathclaw brown. I'm going to hit all the areas that will be getting the most light, not worrying too much about this lighter paint getting into the recesses. I repeat that with some skeleton bone, being a little more selective with my highlight placements. After that, I'm going to wash the pelt again, this time with some Seraphim Sepia. This is going to re-establish some of that shade between the strands of hair and blend those highlights in. After this, I do another shade in the darkest sections with some regular black paint I watered down. With surfaces like hair or fur, it's always best to highlight and shade multiple times to really capture every facet of them, and what I've just done is the broad stroke shading that captures the volumes of the object in overview. What I'm going to do next is zoom in and highlight those individual hair strands. I start by using some skeleton bone, and I'm just going to draw lots of little lines following the direction of the fur. I really want to keep these as small and fine as possible and cover the entire surface of the pelt. After this is done, I repeat that with some dark ivory, this time picking out only the most raised sections of the fur. Having done that, I have a fully textured fur, but I've lost a bit of that volumetric light and shadow I started with. To fix that, I'm going to do another pass of shades with Seraphim Sepia and black, this time much more selective in where I'm shading to really get some nice variation. And after that, the fur is done. During that process, I picked out the diamond-shaped gemstones in Basilisk Red, along with details like the scabbard and the wolf pelt's claws. Red is an odd colour for claws, but it was like that on the original model I'm basing that off, and who am I to argue with the early 90s heavy metal team? It's a bright colour, so I'm on board, no need to tell me twice. Before I highlight the gems, I'm going to paint in the power sword. These things need a tutorial all by themselves, and there are plenty of those out there, so I'll just put up the colours used on the screen now. If you do want to see me do an in-depth tutorial on those, let me know in the comments. Back to the red details. So for those Space Wolf gems, it's first good to make one of the top two facets brighter. Here I'm going to take some resplendent red and cover the top right quarter. Then find the opposite quarter, in this case the bottom left, and darken it. I use dark flesh with a little black. Next I take some bright shadow flesh and highlight not only the raised edges in this plus sign shape, but also all around the edges of the gem. I then mix in a little white and hit the corners and centre. I use the same colours to highlight the scabbard. I'm going to paint the eye and the lens at the top of the helmet in white. Then a bit of Iandin yellow for a nice simple glow. Okay, so that's the majority of the model done, bar the metallics and some transfers. So I'm going to do what I always do with metal models and give it a gloss varnish for protection. While the finish will look wet, I can fix that after applying the decals with a matte coat. Just be sure to thin the gloss so as not to clog any details. Next I use some microset to apply a few transfers, including the Space Wolf emblem on the right pauldron. Again, applying transfers could be its own tutorial, so let me know if you want to see that. After they're applied, I use a matte coat to counteract that glossiness. As usual, I do this before the metallics go down so as not to damage the natural metallic finish. The steel parts are simply done with gunmetal grey, a highlight of gunmetal grey and chrome, and a shade with some thinned down black paint. For the gold, I mixed some copper with some gold pigment for a nice rich red gold. I mixed some chrome with that to highlight it, and then washed that down with some thinned down dark flesh. And that's the model done, bar some basing and a little tidying up. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I had a great time revisiting a model I loved growing up, and hopefully doing it justice in a way that I couldn't back then. My Space Wolf is ready to go, howling at the moon like the good little doggo he is. So don't forget to check out all the stuff in the description. Come join us on Discord where we have a lovely little community going, or help support the channel by buying us a coffee. We also have an Element Games affiliate link, so you can support us by making your regular hobby purchases at no extra cost to yourself. Stick around for the beauty shots at the end. I've been Amy for Bleeding Tree Gaming, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye!